So welcome back to the Floriani Software Fundamentals video series on FTCU. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. In this section we're going to be covering opening and saving, importing and exporting files. So as we talked about in our section on the file types that you can open and work with in FTCU, there are embroidery files, which are stitch files like PES, VP3, etc. There are internal format files called WAF files, and those are our proprietary object files that you can only open in Floriani software. And there are also image or raster files, and there are vector files. And so we're going to talk about how to open and import all of those file types with the software. So to open up a file type, there's two ways you can do it. So you can come here to this icon that looks like an open folder, and if you click it, you'll get a standard Windows dialog box allowing you to open a file. And the other way you can do it is you can come here to File and click Open, and either one of those things gets you to the same place. Now it's important to understand that File Open only opens embroidery files and our WAF files and our older C2S, which is the precursor to WAF. Those are the only types of files that you can use open with. There are other ways to get other kinds of files into the software, but this is the way you open a file. So let's go ahead and open up a file, and you're going to get this dialog box here. You're going to see the file name. Now, what you see in here will depend on how you have your view settings set in Windows. So this is a Windows setting. So right now I have it set to show me the details. But if I click on one of these, I will see a preview over here of the image. Now, if I want to turn off the preview, I can uncheck that box, but I don't know why you would ever want to turn that off. So I always leave it on. And if I look at this one, that's a different angel or cherub. And all I need to do to open that is to simply click Open right here. Now, before I do that, I want to talk about this box right here, Convert to Outlines. Now, what Floriani software does when you try to open up a stitch file is it takes a look at those stitches and it tries to convert them into vectors or embroidery objects, which makes it easy for us to edit what those objects are, to change the stitch types, etc. In addition, it allows us to resize it any size we want, because as we resize it, the stitches within that object get regenerated. If all we had was stitches, then we wouldn't be able to do as much magic with the file when we open it. So you have this box here, Convert to Outlines. Now it's checked. Now for WAF files, those are pretty much always outlined, so it really doesn't matter whether you have that checked or not for WAF files. But for stitch files, you want to usually leave this checked. Now when it tries to convert those stitch objects into outlines, it guesses as to what the outline should be and what stitch type should be inside that outline. Sometimes it doesn't always guess correctly. Usually it does a pretty good job, but not always. So if you open up a stitch file and you don't get the results that you expect, or the file looks weird, you can uncheck Convert to Outlines and then go ahead and open it up. Now when you do that, be aware that you'll have very limited editing ability at that point, but sometimes that's the only way to get the file into the software. Now there is an advanced button here, so I'm going to go ahead and show you this. Now when you're starting out, I recommend that you don't worry about this button, but I'm going to go ahead and show it to you anyway. When I click the advanced button, what I get is some options for Convert to Outlines, also known as Stitches to Outlines. So you can remove the underlay, and normally this is none, and you can take simple or aggressive. So those are your three choices: none, simple, or aggressive. None leaves the underlay in place. Simple just tries to take the underlay out in a semi-aggressive mode, and aggressive mode obviously tries to take it out very aggressively. Now, one thing that's important to note is that if you take out the underlay, it's important that you use your properties box to put the underlay back in before you try to stitch that file. And we'll learn how to do that when we talk about the object properties. And the other thing is merge fills. And if you've ever watched a fill stitch, sometimes you'll see that it stitches part of the fill and then it runs over and stitches another part of the fill. What this checkbox does is it tries to anticipate those, and instead of making it 3 or 4 separate fill objects, it tries to convert it into a single object. So you can play with these if you want. Normally you don't need to. I'm just going to go ahead and click cancel on that, and we're going to go ahead and open this file. So if I click open, you'll see that that picture of the cherub comes into the software. So that is your basic file open, and once again I want to reiterate the fact that it opens up embroidery files and WAF files and no other kinds of files. Now when I open a file, it opens into its own new design window with its own name up here. So the name of this file was RL-AL-0006, wherever the heck that name comes from, who knows. But anyway, that's the name of this embroidery file. So I can see that name right here in the tab. Now, if I grab a new design window by clicking my new page icon, you'll see that I've got design 2 in there. And if I come back here and click this one, I can go back and forth between the tabs like we showed you in one of the very first lessons. But this one doesn't have a name yet because I haven't saved it. The minute I save this file, the name will appear here. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, if I want to get another embroidery file in here, like let's say I wanted to get the other angel in here, if I just come back up here to open and click this one and click open, that is going to open up in its own separate tab. So whenever I do an open, whatever I open is always going to come into its own tab. So the other one is here and this one is here. Now if I wanted to open them both up in the same window because I wanted to make a layout, I have some options. I could open both of them like I just did. I could select this angel and I could copy, and then I could come back over here and I could paste her into this window. And that's definitely a very valid way to do it. But there's another way to do it, and that is with something we call a merge file. So if I come up to my file menu, I'll have an item right here called merge stitch file. Now don't be upset about the fact that this says stitch file. It actually can merge in a regular embroidery stitch file or a WAF or C2S file. So if I click that and then I come here and click that same embroidery design and click open, what's going to happen is she is going to come in and be in the same window, and now what I've got is a file window that consists of both of these images. Now if I simply save this right now, I'm going to overwrite this particular cherub. So if I wanted to create a whole new file, what I would have to do is do a save as, and we'll get to that in a second. But while we're on the subject of merging, I just want to go over a couple of items with you. So first of all, if I wanted to get a totally new design window that's blank, I could merge both files into it. So I could merge stitch file, do my first one, and I could repeat that file, merge stitch file, select my second one, and I would have the same thing, except this time it's got no name. So I'm in no danger of overwriting that file. So let me come back over here. Or actually, let me just close this, and it's going to ask me if I want to save the changes. There's the warning we talked about earlier, and I'm just going to say no, and I'm going to close this one because I don't really care about that one. What I want to do is show you the difference between these two sets of embroidery files in here. If I click on the one that I merged in, which is this angel, you'll see when I click her, everything associated with that angel gets selected. And that's because this angel comes in grouped. And we're going to talk about grouping in another lesson. But if I come over here and click on this cherub, you'll see that I can click and select the individual parts of the cherub because this one is not grouped. So the important thing to remember here is that when you open up an object, it's going to come in ungrouped in the most part, and when you merge it, it's always going to come in grouped. And the reason is because when you do a file merge, sometimes this angel could have come in right here. And if this was the individual pieces of the angel, if I didn't have anything selected and I wanted to move her off, the fact that she's grouped allows me to click anywhere on her and then easily move her off, and then I can ungroup her if I want to work with the various parts of it. So don't get crazy on me yet. We're going to talk about grouping in another lesson, but I just wanted you to notice the difference between the way a file merge works versus a file open. So let's talk about saving files now. If I were to just come up here to this save icon and click save, it would overwrite this file here because there's already a file name associated with it. The other way I can do a save is to go File and Save. And I'm not going to click it because I don't want to overwrite my cherub. So just be careful if you open up a file and you make changes to it. If you simply click Save, it's going to write right over the top of it. Now, if you wanted to save this in a different file name, or you wanted to change the format, then you would come up to File and click Save As. And when you do Save As, it's always going to ask you for a new file name, and it's always going to allow you to change the format. Now, the default format is WAF, which is our internal format, like we've talked about. If you click the drop down, however, you can select any of these other stitch file formats to change it to. So if I wanted to actually stitch this out on my Brother Multi-Needle, I could come here and click this one, and it would save in the proper format for that machine. Now, let's talk about this for a second. I'm going to click off of that so we're not distracted by it. A really, really great workflow, and we have talked about this when we talked about the various file types, is that you always want to get in the habit of saving your WAF files. And you want to consider those your master format files. When you want to edit a file, you want to, in most cases, open up the WAF file, make your changes, and then resave it. And then when you get ready to stitch it, that's when you would save it as your stitch file. So if I wanted to actually stitch out this design on my multi-needle, I would then come to File, Save As, and I would come here and I would click this and click Save. Now I'm not actually going to stitch this out, so I'm not going to do that, but that would allow me to save it in a different format. So again, in general, the workflow is anytime you want to edit a file, if it's available, you want to edit and then resave the WAF version, and then only when you get ready to stitch, that's when you would save your machine format version. Now, there's no need to save the machine format versions as you're working on a file. So if you're working on it, for example, over several days, there's absolutely no need to save the stitch file until you're actually ready to go and stitch it. So that is opening and saving files. And again, I want to reiterate that open and save only works with embroidery machine format files and our internal WAF files. Now, what if you want to bring in a vector file? The way you bring in a vector file is with this icon right here, Import Vector Art. You can also come to File and you can say Import Artwork. Both of those are exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and click this icon here to import vector art. and it's going to come up and look in the last directory we were playing in, which was this Angels directory. But I don't have any vector files in that directory, so I'm going to go look for some, and I know I've created a folder in here with a vector file on it. It's in my vectors folder, and it's a picture of a dolphin. And so this is an SVG file, which, if you'll recall, that's a type of vector file. So if you want to see the various types we can open, you can click this little down arrow here. You can open Adobe Illustrator files, Windows Meta files, in two different styles, SVG and FCM. FCM are the files that are created for the scan and cutter from Brother, and SVG files is a standard vector format. I want to just let you know about Adobe Illustrator files, though. If you try to open one of these files, you need to make sure that it is saved as Adobe Illustrator version 8. And that's a fairly old version, but all current versions of Illustrator can downsave to version 8. So if you have somebody giving you an Illustrator file, make sure they save it in version 8 so you can open it up correctly in the software. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Open, and it is going to bring in that dolphin. And you can see here that it's an outline of a dolphin. It's artwork, and I can tell that it's artwork because if I look over here in my properties, I can see that it's artwork. And I can turn this into stitches, which we will deal with later. So we'll talk about how to do that later. In the meantime, I'm going to delete that design. And what I want to do now is talk to you about raster files or images. And to do that, I'm going to get a new piece of paper. Now, what raster files and images are, those are those bitmap files that we talked about. And the way we load those into the software is as a backdrop. And we do that with the backdrop tool here. So if I click it, it is going to come up in the last directory that I looked at, and it's going to ask me to open up a image file. Now I don't have anything in there, so I'm going to go up here. I'm going to look in my images folder. I'll look in my here's a bitmap of a balloon, for example, so I'll go ahead and open that up. Now this is what we call a backdrop. In the world of digitizing, the way most digitizers work is they don't draw things freehand on the screen. They open up an image of what they want to make embroidery stitches out of, and then they trace outlines over the top and then fill it with embroidery stitches. And that is the normal way that people digitize. And that's how we're going to show you how to digitize in a much further down the road lesson. But we bring in this backdrop so we can trace over the top of it, much like you did back in kindergarten where you used tracing paper. Now, once you have the backdrop in here, and I can move this around right now, and you'll notice when my cursor changes to a hand, that means that I can move it. And over here in my properties box, I can resize it and do other things with it, etc. So that's how I get a backdrop in. Now, once I click off it, or I click my select tool again so that I'm no longer in backdrop mode, this is kind of locked in place here. I can't select it. I can't do anything with it. I can't see the properties of it. If I need to reselect my backdrop to modify it or change it, resize it, do whatever, the way I do that is I come back to my backdrop tool and I click it again, and now my backdrop is selected and I can modify the properties of my backdrop over here. And we'll talk about that when we talk about digitizing more, why you would want to do modifications of those properties and things. But that's how you get an image or raster file in. And remember, those are JPEGs, GIFs, TIFFs, PNGs, files like that. Now, if you temporarily want to hide the backdrop, this control right here does that. So this toggles the backdrop on and off. So if I click it, it goes away. If I click it, it comes back. Now, it's not really gone when I turn it off, but it will go away and come back when I click it. Again, if I want to select it, clicking on it doesn't do me any good. I can click it on it all day long. What I need to do to select it is reselect my backdrop tool. So the way this backdrop tool works is that if no backdrop is loaded and you click on it, it gives you the opportunity to load a backdrop. Once a backdrop has been loaded, then you need to click on the backdrop tool to manipulate it after you've clicked on the select tool the first time. All right. Now, if you want to replace the backdrop with a different one, you can come up here to File and click Load Backdrop. And if you do that, it would allow you to load a different image in. So for example, I could load in this balloon and it would replace that other balloon. Of course, they're totally different types of balloons, but it would replace that other one. And again, if I wanted to turn it off, I could do that. But my original backdrop is gone now, and I have replaced it. So if you want to load the backdrop, you can either load it for the first time using this tool, or you can use File and then Load Backdrop. But if you want to load a new backdrop to replace the old one, the only way to do it is right here with Load Backdrop. So that is an overview of how you would load in both embroidery files and save them, and load in vectors and I haven't talked about saving them, and load in backdrops. Now, loading in a backdrop, there's no way to resave this backdrop. There's just no way to do that, and there's really no need to do that. But if you were to, let me hide the backdrop, if I were to load in that vector file again, so I'm in my images folder, so here's just some things. So this was an outline of a feather that I did for Trapunto a long time ago. But if I wanted to export this as a piece of artwork, I could come here to my file menu and I could say export artwork. All right, so I could export this as a piece of artwork, and I have a choice of SVG or FCM or AI. So I can choose any of those three formats should I want to export a piece of artwork, and I probably would do that if I wanted to cut this out, which is exactly what I did with this. I cut out this shape here out of a piece of batting with my cutter to make a Trapunto design. So that is import and export artwork, save a file. There's one more type of save that I want to show you, and to do that I'm going to come back over here to where I have my embroidery files, because if I wanted to save these as an image, let's say I wanted to give this layout to somebody so they could see what it looked like, and they didn't have any kind of embroidery program and they couldn't open it, I wouldn't want to give them a stitch file. I can come here to File and I can say Export Image, and it will allow me to save it as an image, either as a bitmap, a JPEG, or a PNG, and of course I would give it a file name and a location. So that is Open Save, Import, Export, and Save Image.